record this session as well and post it to YouTube. And I believe that most all of you have access to the Express support via Slack as well. We'll make sure that everyone gets access to these slides too. So it's a great group of people joining us today. We have a mix of people who we've never worked with before, in addition to organizations who are definitely in the ResourceX community doing variations of program budgeting, priority-based budgeting, fiscal health analysis, or building their programmatic business intelligence. What we wanted to do, several weeks ago, we wrote a paper, and it was an outline of 3 strategies that seem extremely relevant during this era. While we called it a 3-point plan, I think just like everybody else, there's a complete acknowledgement that there are no silver bullets for the order of magnitude of the situation that we're all facing right now. And nevertheless, we wanted to make sure that we were giving you all the best of our thinking, the best of our tools, and the most relevant insights that we possibly could. And that's what led to the 3-point plan. So today we wanted to focus on, for everybody on the call, those who are actively implementing PBB or fiscal health, and those that are brand new to it, we wanted to spend some time going through specifically what these 3 elements are of the world as we see it, and how you can bring them into your organization. And so we'll go through these sequentially in order, starting with fiscal health forecasting and scenario planning, then leading into program-based business intelligence, how to assemble programmatic data and why, and then finally getting into regional strategies for working with your local partners to try to optimize resources as well. As we start with fiscal health, as you see in the plan, and this is all summarized in a paper as well that's on our website, the overarching idea for our emphasis on fiscal health forecasting was to make sure that organizations are not only modeling their future forecasting projections as they see things today and what the order of magnitude of the revenue shortfall might look like, but even more important than simply doing one forecast and trying to measure or quantify your shortfall is to encourage you to continually be monitoring what you're seeing out there and updating your forecast so that we can be able to adjust to however the situation turns out. The problem, the downside of sticking to one projection is while you may come up with great strategies that solve the current shortfall as you know it, the problem is ever evolving, and before we know it, there will be a new set of challenges potentially on the horizon. Hopefully, there will be no new challenges, that this is as bad as it gets. But I think as everybody has come to realize, as this situation evolves, we will need to adjust and adapt. And that is the point of fiscal health monitoring. So when we did our first webinar with GFOA, we were emphasizing this point and encouraging this practice of scenario planning, of constantly looking out towards the future and trying to envision what could happen. And the reason that scenario planning was a tool that GFOA really wanted us to talk about is that in this particular environment, there's such a high degree of uncertainty. It's actually less important to try and pinpoint your forecast, and far more important to try to imagine plausible futures that could materialize, knowing full well we don't know which one is going to come about. But if we could imagine plausible futures, then you can begin to stack up various solutions that are appropriate for one scenario emerging versus another. I was reading recently, Peter Diamandis has a book that's very future oriented, and he was describing that from a psychological perspective, one thing we're all very good at, on average, as human beings, is imagining somewhere 6 months out into the future. But our own evolution suggests that even the best of our future-focused thinkers were only adept at planning for maybe that night's food or several months into the future, imagining where they might reside for the winter season. But to imagine beyond 6 months out into the future is just something that we're usually not good at. And I know that this has come about in our own work with organizations, as many of us have focused on what is the nature of the short-term problem that we're trying to solve, and not yet beginning to think about what happens if there's a resurgence of infections in the fall or the winter, what happens if there's another economic downturn prompted by shelter-in-place policies that are appropriate for public health, but certainly could have numerous increasing hits to our revenues. And so with GFOA, what we did is we tried to imagine four viable, four plausible scenarios for revenue shortfalls. And I'm sure many of you have variations of these on your minds, but we imagined quite simply the little v, which is for those of us who have had our revenues impacted negatively for a short-term period of time, but who expect a rebound of some sort to happen quickly. That's what little v constituted, as differentiated from big V, which is simply a larger downturn, but marked by, again, a rapid recovery overall. And for little v and big V scenarios, the idea is that, hey, things will come back, and therefore there are different shorter-term solutions that are appropriate for little v or big V. Whereas as you look towards the bottom of the screen here, something like a W, which is just back-to-back V's next to each other. There's a downturn followed by a recovery, followed by a downturn again, again, perhaps because we have to close the economy down and go back to some version of shelter in place, followed by recovery. That could materialize. And then there's the L, which is a much slower recovery. Maybe we don't necessarily bounce back like we would all hope, but there's something more like a recession or a depression that takes place. And for the L, there's more of a permanent shift in the resources that are coming in. And again, the reason that you envision these is because there are totally different strategies and solutions that are appropriate to solve each of these possible scenarios, and you want to be prepared for whatever may come about. In our second webinar with GFOA, we started to focus on the strategies and solutions that could come about depending on the various scenarios. Very recently, like as of a couple days ago, we launched a survey, and I'm going to be sharing some of the data that has come out of the first round of responses to that survey. But one of the very first questions was, for those of you who are doing some sort of financial scenario planning, how often are you updating these scenarios? And I thought this is pretty telling that the majority of responders are at least doing a monthly update, if not a weekly. Some monthly updates, close to 60% of the responses, and then somewhere around 30% were weekly. And then there were a host of people who took the survey who aren't yet doing scenario planning. Nobody responded that they're updating scenarios on a daily basis. That's probably appropriate, even though this thing is changing so quickly. Daily updates to your scenario planning are probably not as necessary. But here's why this starts to resonate with me. From the April 8th webinar, you see that in the orange tag up at the top, we showed this slide, and it was a decision tree approach to start to plot out the path that may materialize indicators that you would start to see, or trigger points, as Shane Kavanaugh called them, that would let you know from left to right what type of scenario is starting to come about. And the idea is you're looking for indicators, and as they become prevalent, or you become aware of them, you start to take policy action, and you have different decisions along this path, depending on if a little v is coming about from the bottom, a big V, a W, or an L. this is from April 8th. This is just a month ago. And when we first did this, most everybody was focused on the little v or the big V. We were talking about immediate activities that we need to implement for continuity of operations planning, with a mindset from a public health perspective that we want to flatten the curve. If we're able to do that, as you follow this path kind of towards the bottom there were certain activities that would make sense, certain actions, and GFOA released their very first paper, which was Cash is King, to say if the V, the little v or the big V does come about, there are ways to just slow the rate of cash flow out the door. And that was their first level of emphasis. And I think it's appropriate because some of the actions or recommendations that we would take if a W or an L materialized are larger scale solutions. The idea was start with the small ones, try to take advantage of as many of those solutions as possible, as we then try to figure out what else might come about, a W or an L. What also impacts me about this particular chart made on April 8th is that at the time we were thinking, well, if a little v or a big V starts to come about, hopefully there's some sort of vaccine being worked on. We're implementing short-term solutions, buying ourselves some time in order for a vaccine to come about and therefore prevent any sort of W or L emerging. As time has gone on, there are far more people talking about W and L than we had seen before. So this is from the survey data as well. The top response as of yesterday for what type of financial scenarios are organizations modeling, 41% are starting to model the L, the very slow recovery, if not a recession or a depression. Again, not to say that this is going to happen, but this is right. It's just very interesting to me as we emphasize the point that at least monthly updates to those scenarios, if not weekly, is appropriate because we're starting to begin to see the different types of scenarios emerge and what people are focused on. I also draw attention with the arrow here to show you there are some organizations starting to think about the string of V's. The string of V's is kind of a new one, but the idea is we might have many of these back-to-back reopenings of the economy, and then if things get bad, we'll have limited shutdown, and we'll have limited reopening, limited shutdown, and it's just kind of a rocky road. As many of your organizations are looking at a phased approach to opening the doors of some businesses and kind of seeing what happens, and you have your phase 1 and your phase 2 and phase 3 openings of the economy, it's probably appropriate to see what would a string of V's look like for your revenue streams, and what are the types of solutions that you would model or implement in the case that any of those came about. So that was from our survey data as well. It kind of in summary, for the little v and the big V, we were suggesting as of April 8th that a lot of the solutions that we could look at are those that are short-term in nature, things that you could do right away. They're not complex, they're immediate, and hopefully they were as painless when it comes to, for instance, personnel impacts as you could possibly make them. But we know full well that for some organizations, even that was not possible. But the idea is, just like GFOA's Cash is King paper, what are those short-term things that we could do? Many of us suspended travel, many of us have deferred capital and so on, to buy some time in order to give yourself the time required to start thinking about some of the bigger strategies and solutions that you would deploy if a W or an L came about. So back to the survey data, we asked the question, what are the types of solutions that, what are the types of solutions that organizations are modeling for the little v and the big V? And this was not only what solutions are you modeling, but what exactly are you implementing? The top response, and I'm sure a lot of you are in the same boat, focusing on how to defer or put a pause on large capital investments. These are one-time in nature. Many of them did not have a direct impact on personnel, although clearly you can imagine that for the contractors or the organizations or the partners you might be working with, there might be an impact on personnel on their side, even though it might not be on your side. But this was the list of the types of solutions in order from the top that most organizations are looking at. Reviewing your capital plan and looking for opportunities to suspend one-time projects, taking a look at those vacant positions, freezing vacancies that would have an impact on lessening the amount of money budgeted for the filling of certain positions overall. Deferring other one-time projects was third there, near 70%. And then we can start to look at everything from diminishing variances to taking a look at reserves and inventorying your own reserves versus other departments who might also have contingency plans or reserves of their own, and on down the line. As we have deployed our own approach to fiscal health modeling, the way to emphasize with pictures the point that we're trying to make is, and the recommendation we're making to you, is to show it in a way that models the evolution from V's to W's and on down the line, how to test solutions. So in this example, here's an organization that might have a revenue shortfall, and you can see the difference in the trajectory of their fund balance from where they had hoped to be pre-COVID to now the trajectory of their fund balance is looking worse off. As this organization then tries to grapple with how are they going to solve this V, maybe they deploy some of those strategies and solutions just like we were demonstrating a second ago. Maybe they pause on a few capital projects. Maybe they have some variety of a mid-year budget adjustment, freezing vacancies, freezing travel, doing some of those things that are more one-time in nature, and that staves off the future of their fund balance going towards zero or negative, and that's good. The point is, as you continue to monitor your fiscal health and model scenarios as they evolve on a weekly or monthly basis, what might happen is that the situation shifts from this little V to more of a steep V. As we start to learn, if that picture begins to materialize, here's what our fund balance might do. And for this picture, then the idea is to have your list, your playbook of solutions for what a second mid-year budget adjustment or a second round of strategies might look like to further bring your costs down and, again, hold that fund balance as best as possible. In this particular picture, what you can begin to evaluate is what is temporary versus what is forever. If this, in fact, if this rebound does come back, as this organization has projected, as strongly as they're hoping it might, you can see the radical shift in the growth of fund balance, which would indicate to you, hey, the objective was not to cut these costs forever, it was temporary. And therefore, I'm hoping the light bulb moment for many organizations is the solutions that you would pick to reduce expenses if you are predicting a V would be more temporary in nature if this is what you're expecting. The ultimate problem, however, is what if it's not temporary? What if the bounce back is not rapid, but there is a shift or a reset of revenues down towards a different level for which short-term solutions would not be the most appropriate actions that you might be able to take. So if an L or something like an L or a deeper W takes place, what would be the range of solutions that you would begin to look at? And as we were starting to think about shifting from the V scenarios to something like a W or L, we asked the question in the survey, what solutions are you modeling for a W and L? Someone came up with a U. That's a new one. There is a recovery that is substantial, but it's not immediate. Maybe it's several years down the road, or a string of V's. And as you look at the types of responses that are coming back, program efficiencies, service level decreases, option to suspend services even temporarily, internal programmatic consolidation or centralization to reduce costs. As you look at these and you consider the difference between these types of solutions and strategies that have been mentioned versus the initial strategies for the V, big V or little v, these are programmatic in nature. And I think that's what's probably most telling as we move into point 2 of the 3-point plan, is we can get by effectively with using our line item business intelligence to solve for the V or big V. But as we start to look towards a W, an L, a U, or a string of Vs, the emphasis will be on impacting programs and service levels and what data do we have to bring to bear for that type of discussion. I'll stop here for 1 second. I did see some questions in the chat, but we're gonna, as we move into point 2, Kirsten asked, are the majority of the responding organizations that cite pausing capital investments to free up cash smaller organizations? It seems that larger cities are more likely to rely on bonding for capital investments, so have less flexibility there. Definitely great question. And I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and analyze some of the responses to see differentiation of larger organizations versus small. What you wrote makes total sense. If that's not an option to pause or put a stop to capital projects that are coming about because it's a matter of you've already taken on the money and you owe for the bond, totally different. That's not a strategy that would be on your list. So to the point of the question that you're raising. So I will get back to you, Kirsten, on that with the differentiation from the folks who have responded, and I'll post it into, well, I'll write you directly because I'm not sure that you're on Express support, but great question. And if anything, it would simply mean that's one less weapon in your arsenal as you go to look for other types of solutions. And thanks, Eric Keck, for joining in as well. So as we kind of wrap up point 1 is why are we doing fiscal health forecasting? Because the solution is ever changing and we have to have our playbook of solutions to stack up or stress test or however you want to communicate that. You need to have your laundry list to say, if this happens next, here's what we're going to do. And the hope is nothing will be as bad as what we've already gone through, but it's definitely a hope for the best, but plan for the worst type of situation. And if we have any time to plan, now is the time to plan before things potentially get worse. And that's the point of getting into point 2 and point 3 down below. So let's get into point 2 of the 3-point plan, which is, as we just demonstrated from the survey, as our respondents had suggested, if we move to a W or an L, if anything like that begins to emerge, the worry is we'll have exhausted all of our short-term line item driven type of solutions. And for good reason, they will have bought us time and served their purpose, but we will be graduating towards the need for something more potent, something more substantial at a programmatic level, making the types of choices such as what programs can we do less of, what programs can we possibly do more efficiently, if we had any way to possibly free up resources. At the same time, we recognize it's so critical to make sure that you're identifying and flagging programs that need more resources right now. There are many of them. We hear from some of our clients from 911 call centers that are in need of overtime and increased staffing because the general public is calling in and asking medical questions. Certainly from a public health standpoint, public safety standpoint, there will be programs that need more resources, further exacerbating the pressure financially that you're already experiencing. And hence the reason we're advocating you need to have some list of your levers that you could pull, and the best levers possible are programmatic decisions to do less of something, free up, reallocate resources, partner, find program efficiencies, and so on. So let's dive into this. So approaches for W and L are beyond what we can possibly achieve with line item data, and they place an emphasis on programmatic discussions and options and decision-making overall. If this is an organization that has pure line item data, again, it's not bad. This is where we all have to start. But for the types of scenarios that are evolving, if we have only line item business intelligence to bring to bear, then the focus of our discussions will be on line items. And like many of you, I've been to these before, and usually it goes something like this. Let's avoid personnel discussions as long as possible, because we are caring and humane, and we don't want to have a dramatic impact on our workforce. And let's focus on what are our other levers. If all we have is line item data, we go on down the line and we have to focus our discussions on how can we change transfers, how can we change travel and training. Here's our bank charges and short-term interest. Here's you go on down the line, supplies and services, gas, oil, lube. What else can you change in a line item level? It's a different. What happens is you are locked into options that are limited based on the vocabulary of line items, versus if we can get into programmatic discussions. So here I'm shifting from line items within our tools to a solid waste management department, and within solid waste, we have trash collection. And if I can drill into trash collection, yes, I can see line items. I can see staff who are supporting this program and the line items that drive that particular cost. I would much rather have a discussion on, hey, what are the options we have on trash collection? Can we partner with somebody? Can we run this program more efficiently? Is it charging enough? Are people paying for the full cost of delivering this program? What are equity issues that we can take into consideration, instead of looking at each and every one of these line items and saying, if I didn't know what this program costs, I would be confined to talking about printing, copying, and bonding line item versus training and development, or telephone charges. If all I have is telephone charges, I can't make the breakthroughs and have a really smart discussion about service levels. With programmatic data, we might be able to talk about efficiency, such as, hey, there is a giant shift taking place, who knows for how long, in the cost of fuel. Maybe our budgeted line item for fuel should be in question as it pertains to trash collection. How much do we budget for that particular program overall? And if we can reduce that line item associated with this particular program, maybe we can reduce those non-personnel costs. This is an example, by $400,000 of $1 million program overall. Maybe there's a regional partnership. We can open up a discussion about who is doing trash collection from our public sector partners. Is anybody contracting for them? What is a business model that we could study for trash programmatically that might be a better solution? How about revenue generation? Is it paying for itself? If we have programmatic data, we can look at the fees for that type of program and say, hey, in this case, for this organization, it looks like it's at least breaking even. So maybe that is not necessarily 100% on the table. But hopefully I'm making the point. Totally different conversation emerges when we have program level data. We were just talking with Branson, Missouri earlier this morning, and they're a great organization to talk with. They cited 3 programmatic examples that they're debating right now. One is a discussion about their courts and whether or not they can partner with the county, and the county could either absorb the court system that the city has been providing. This has apparently been a discussion that's been on the table for years, but we finally have the burning platform, the great sense of urgency to bring up the exact same discussion and see if we can get a different outcome. But with the program data, we can advance it. They're talking about regional fleet. They provide a garage. What I thought was really cool about this example was sometimes if all we had was basic budget data, we would say we have a garage, we have a fleet shop overall, and at least I would make a ton of assumptions about what goes on in that fleet operation. But in Branson's, we can drill into it and see just exactly what all the other types of programs are that take place there. Everything from taking care of their snowplows and snowplow maintenance comes from their garage overall, to some of their street sweeping, which didn't show up in that graphic, but that's pretty cool. They have a recycling center that's been on the table for quite some time, and the discussion has been, are people using it? Is it sustainable? for the long term? Can we talk about various programs specifically within recycling and what they cost and what opportunities we have there? For them, as a $250,000 program, and it's very much on the table for evaluating what are some of those options. But what was promising from the discussion with Branson is that when we can drill into these specific programs, everything is on the table for discussion overall. One other point from Branson was that these are not new discussions. They have come up before, and for many staff, there's that feeling of, hey, we've already discussed shifting the courts to the county, and our council said no to this once before, and that's fine, but it's a completely new day, is their perspective on things. So even discussions that have been going on for some period of time, or strategies or solutions that have been shot down in the past, our realization in talking with organizations is that everything's back on the table. And I think that's fair or meaningful to have that in your mind. Don't take anything for granted that maybe elected officials or your leadership have thought one way about a solution in the past. Maybe they'll think differently given today's type of circumstances. So from the survey data, we asked, how would you describe the data that you're drawing upon to generate the types of strategies and solutions you're deploying? The vast majority of organizations, and this survey has been filled out by far more non-clients that we've worked with as opposed to clients, but it's kind of our highest responses are organizations depending on their line item data, and that's fantastic. Use it as much as you possibly can, but a growing number or just as large of a number trying to pull more of their programmatic data into that discussion. Also interesting, not to be forgotten, but we asked, are you taking into consideration the impacts of any decision that you make? Are you starting with results or outcomes? And about a quarter of the respondents said yes. Are you starting with mandates, or is your decision-making paradigm more legally based? Are you thinking about the programs you are mandated to do versus programs where you might have some more flexibility? About 30% said that is the frame, the lens that they're using. And we also asked, mainly because of our work in the city and county of Denver and also Kansas City, Missouri, who is starting from a frame of driving decisions based on equity and the impacts of any change in service level based on an equity lens. Now, granted, this is dependent on how anybody might define that term, but about 20% said that is a driving force in the data that they're drawing upon. So quite fascinating. Our goal overall, this is City of St. Albert, is to move you from line items to an understanding of every type of opportunity that you might have to deploy. We are Resource X as the name of the company. We emphasize, this was told to us from Flagstaff, Arizona, you want to be resourceful. Being resourceful means knowing where resources are needed and knowing where you have flexibility to change the way that you are resourcing programs. From revenue increase, where do we have opportunities to increase revenues and fees and charges overall? Where do we have opportunity to repurpose resources through program efficiency? Where can we partner and be an insourcing partner overall in a region and possibly make money doing so? Where are options for service level decreases, and where might we leverage partners and outsource overall? We're going to be going through an exercise with the City of St. Albert, bringing back their programmatic data and actually re-asking some of these key questions as they are trying to deal with a revenue shortfall as well. But the whole hope is that you would be equipped with the ability to drill down into your programs, however you're doing it. If you're working with us, it looks like this, and be able to see, here's year-end financial statements. This is great. Is there any ability to provide this program to local nonprofits, to any entities? It could be a long shot, but it could also generate some revenue. And that's kind of the whole hope, is how many opportunities do we have for revenue increase? How many opportunities do we have for expense reduction overall. Salem, Oregon, 2 days of working at this, trying to tag programs with a sense of its direction or its future or its opportunity area. Salem did this last year, and they have 127 opportunities to at least mine and be able to bring to bear for the decisions that are going to have to be made here upcoming, and will probably be ripe for discussion of can we update these solutions overall. Denver, we're very much in the middle of our work there. They have described their work as a program inventory initiative, and we will be back, I think, next week, even talking about, we had just scratched the surface in a subset of departments who we're working with, and next week the game plan, very similarly, is to focus at the programmatic level and be looking for opportunity areas as they move forward. So how do we get there? And especially for organizations who are thinking of assembling this data for the first place, we start with our line item data. We're attaching a new data layer called a program inventory. What is it that we actually provide? And we can attach line items to come up with a program cost. We can add additional layers of data or not. Some organizations can stop at program inventory and costing, and that alone is immensely powerful business intelligence to be able to drive discussions about options. But as you see in the red, we can layer on what we call basic program attributes. I'll discuss those in just a second. But it's just additional things we might want to know about a program before we make a decision about it, such as maybe it's mandated, maybe it recovers its cost, maybe it serves a particular population overall. But there are ways to tag programs with attributes, characteristics, or qualities. We can graduate to the yellow level and say, what do we know about the program, not only from a cost perspective and a basic program attribute perspective, but what about its impact on the safety of our citizens? What about its impact on economic vitality? We want to make sure right now that, given the strain that so many businesses are going through, but everybody's going through, maybe we want to have less of an impact on programs that have a high degree of impact on economic well-being or vitality. And that is something that you might want to know. And then, just as we were describing for Salem, Oregon, St. Albert, and Denver, what is the opportunity? We call it the program's future direction. Is it a program that we can partner on in the future? Is it a program we can do more efficiently in the future? How can we tag the program with what we know about it? And our belief is the more data that we can layer on that program inventory, the greater the insights that we can start to generate as organizations together. Differentiating between, if you had the need to act within 1 to 60 days, you might be thinking about, if I have to make decisions now, then it's left-hand side, line item business intelligence. I'm deferring capital projects tomorrow because we have to. That is the design of this particular slide. Whereas over on the right-hand side, if we have even just a little bit longer to start thinking about gathering the data that we need to be the basis for W or L-shaped scenarios that emerge, how can we start to generate programmatic data if these are the types of questions we're trying to solve? What programs need more resources? What can we do less of? What can we suspend? And programs are that vehicle for instigating the types of discussions we want to get into. Very quick crash course, program inventory. What do we mean by that? Anybody can do this. We do this with our clients, that's for sure, but for those of you who are brand new, the idea is getting beyond a department level and talking about what are the things that people spend their time doing? What are the programs that they provide? So here is a list for everything from cemetery management to community events to supporting various boards and committees to the time that you spent on capital planning, identifying programs and coming up with some basic knowledge about the description of that program. What does it do? And this is business intelligence. Even if you did nothing else besides come up with a program inventory, at least you can have discussions about, are there any programs on this list that we could suspend, we could do less of, we could change our level of service? And of course, that would instigate a question about, well, how much does that program cost? What would we actually save? And that would lead you to the next step, which is program costing. But we could not advise or recommend doing this anymore. Come up with this list of programs. It's actually quite powerful. The second step is program costing, and that is trying to come up with an accurate allocation of your resources towards the programs that you provide. So again, anybody can do this. You have your personnel data, you have your non-personnel data. Take your budget, take your most recently approved budget. These are the resources that you know you have. Some organizations go as far as to allocate revenue. And the idea is to be able to say, okay, if this is my department, I've come up with my program inventory. I used this example earlier, but just to further solidify it in your mind, if we had solid waste management, what are the programs that take place there? It's not just one thing in this organization. It's a $7 million operational unit within which there's everything from curbside recycling collection to trash collection to organics to the depot for recycling to education and promotion, and tying your resources, allocating your people, allocating your non-personnel line items to these programs, at least to come up with a ballpark estimate, an accurate representation to the best of your knowledge. This is not a day in, day out time tracking system. It's an allocation method that will at least equip you with accurate data to move forward in a programmatic discussion. If you chose to keep on going and try to learn more about the programs that you provide, you can tag programs or score them. In our approach to doing this, we would consider that there are certain basic things you want to know about every program, like is it mandated, is it not mandated? What do we know about the change in demand? Is it increasing? Has it been stable? How about population served or cost recovery or degree of reliance overall? Are you the only possible provider of that program? And then what are the impacts of that program on various outcomes you're trying to achieve? As I mentioned earlier, this is a layer of data that would sure add to your discussions, but given the time constraints that everybody is facing right now, maybe you don't have time to score programs, but at least get through program inventory and program costing and consider scoring programs or adding these basic program attributes as time permits overall. And then finally, the punchline to all of this, whatever data you can bring to bear, is to drive a discussion around what is the future? What is the opportunity that you could pull the trigger on to save money or generate new revenue? And we call these new ideas program insights, and that's what we're trying to drive. In the pre-COVID era, we would apply a blueprint for action that was future focused, like 3 to 5 years down the road. We were really trying to help our local government partners say, what programs need to grow? That's the left-hand side of this blueprint. What programs need more resources in the future, where if we were looking back on this moment 3 years from now, and we said, man, I can't believe we're still providing this program at the same level of service, that we'd be wildly disappointed. You know, we really want to grow it. You think of cybersecurity and IT, where you hope that that has greater capabilities and we feel less vulnerable. Or you think of maybe a program that serves people who are homeless in your community, or infrastructure programs, or whatever the case might be. The left-hand side of the blueprint is where do you need more resources? And the right-hand side of the blueprint is tagging programs with every opportunity to either reduce what you're spending on it right now and reallocate those resources versus generating new revenue opportunities. And our belief has been, and we see it play out, that every program has a future. Every program lends itself to at least one of these opportunity areas. For this environment that we're facing today, we've advocated that instead of maybe 3 to 5 years down the road as the future, we're probably thinking 3 to 5 months down the road. But the exact same type of blueprint applies, and this is what we are working on with some of our partners today. Include a blueprint related but slightly modified set of program insights where we're still trying to tag or isolate programs that need to grow, programs that don't need to grow, but they certainly can't be reduced, more of a status quo position. You think cleaning water for a clean drinking water program would lend itself great to a status quo. I don't think that it needs to increase in this environment, but I certainly can't imagine decreasing it unless we found some awesome efficiency that's been on our minds for some time. Service level decrease, even if temporary. Option to suspend, even if temporary. Is there an internal centralization solution that could create a great efficiency or a consolidation of, maybe a couple of departments are doing fleet, maybe a couple of departments are doing IT services, and is there any sort of regional partnership that could come about? As I close point 2 from the 3-point plan, I wanted to give you some hope of how this can come together. This is an organization we're working with right now. It's the city of East Moline, Illinois. And in the span, thanks to Jackie English from our team, who just gave me these updates of about 2 weeks working together, they have made their way through the development of a program inventory for the first time, and they've allocated personnel and non-personnel costs to the tune of approximately 88% of their costs have been allocated from a full budget perspective, citywide costs. And that's pretty remarkable in 2 weeks to think, man, if you can go from where you are today with line item data to a program inventory and program costs. They are also working on allocating revenue. And so it's going cost allocation first, but revenue is not that far behind. This is extremely promising to us that it can be done in this period of time overall. Simultaneously, East Moline is taking on the every program has a future mindset and starting to come up with program insights as they go. So this is taking place within the first 2 weeks of their work. Here is a fire suppression and EMS program where there's at least some ideation about a regional solution that could emerge. They're in the Quad Cities between Illinois and Iowa. And possibly there's a partnership that could emerge, and that's fantastic. They're already starting to flag these, so you can imagine doing that for your department or your organization overall. And here's a span of the actual days at work, moving their way through program inventory, identification, and all the way to that 88% cost allocation mark. I did want to make sure that people knew Liz Johnston and Santina from our team are working on a cohort classroom style approach to building out program inventories, program costing, tagging programs of basic program attributes, as you see, and we will have more to say about that in an upcoming webinar, but anticipating very soon. We wanted to make this available probably end of May or early June as we come up with an implementation method that might be appropriate for your organization. Last story here as we move into point 3. I made the point about solutions that or strategies that might have been forsaken in the past might have a new day emerging. We just heard this story from the city of South Jordan, Utah, using their programmatic data. They've been talking for 20 years apparently about a fitness and aquatics center that the city has been running. Meanwhile, Salt Lake County runs 15 various types of fitness centers. They have a business model in the county that can create a tremendous economy of scale. Given this environment, they just now achieved a breakthrough where the county will take on those operations, allowing the city of South Jordan to get out of that business, reduce some costs for sure, and be able to either reallocate or meet their revenue shortfall. While meanwhile, the county is able to provide the same level, actually more services in this type of partnership. This is really cool to us. It's a programmatic decision. It's been a long time coming. It didn't make sense in an environment of economic prosperity and abundance for some reason. But today, given the constraints that we're facing, they can make that breakthrough and apply their programmatic data. And that brings us to point 3. Point 3 is we're going to do our best with the line item data we have, and we're going to do our best with programmatic data. But given the order of magnitude of some of the shortfalls that we could be seeing, which we have no control over, we could have so little resources left to operate local government that it's wise to start to think about how we can leverage other partners to still provide for the needs of our citizens. There might be programs that you are providing right now that you don't want to partner on. You want to provide them on your own. They're of the utmost priority to provide by yourself. There might be other programs, however, where if your choice was to not do it because you don't have enough resources, or to pitch in 50% of what it used to cost to some sort of community or regional solution, this is what we're advocating. We're trying to understand how can your community partner with other nonprofits, other public sector, other private sector entities overall. And our strategy for this is something that we call program mapping. Eric Keck and I actually did a thorough presentation on the program mapping solution that's on our YouTube channel. I'm going to hit some highlights from that because I want to make sure that you see exactly why we're talking about this type of solution. I did think it was fascinating, and this is my segue into it as well, that of the types of strategies and solutions for V or WLU and the string of V's, note that the bottom solutions, regional insourcing, where you could actually drive some revenue, programmatic shared services or merger consolidation, these were ranked the lowest. Very few people were choosing these types of solutions to model. And I think it's because in the past, you know, sometimes partnerships are a pain. We totally get it. We have great shining examples of partnerships, and there's also plenty of examples where it doesn't turn out very well. And even within ResourceX, for as many times as we've seen a partnership solution that makes sense financially, we've seen that exact solution not implemented because of other reasons. For example, it's a pain to implement, or there's some politics of who is going to control the regional solution. And all of those, while they are fair and appropriate considerations, it's a new era, and we just want to say that that's why this point is so important to us. Regional partnerships could actually make a ton of sense programmatically overall. In the city of San Jose, California, they were one of the first to actually identify in our work together that they wanted to measure in their basic program attributes degree of reliance, meaning they wanted to know, are they the only possible provider of a program, or are there others? Whether they choose to partner with them or not, or source differently, they wanted to measure overall degree of reliance. 2 years ago, we did a mine of our database of a giant population of programs, the punchline being of everybody we had worked with at that time, if you looked at their budget, and their budget was this pie chart, 60% of their budget was tied up in programs that are at least offered by somebody. There is some option on the table to consider whether or not they could partner, whereas 40% appeared to be uniquely up to that local government to provide. There's a low degree of reliance for these other programs. Within this 40%, there was still the question, do we want to provide these programs? Even if we're uniquely qualified, maybe they are not of the highest priority overall. And we think that that is very important to take into consideration. In our highlight presentation, Eric Keck and I, we talked about a couple of very basic examples of this. Eric Keck managed in the city of Inglewood, which is not a major metropolis, to insource and provide fleet regionally to neighboring communities of Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village in their school district, where it was a cost decrease for Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village. They paid less than what they were used to paying for their own fleet as they paid the city of Inglewood. Inglewood brought in those new revenues. Yes, they had to add to their own costs to add to the capacity overall, but they were making more on the revenue side than the expense side. That produces a win-win. How many more Inglewood fleet situations can we come up with? Imagine that for your own organization. Washington County, Wisconsin did an exercise called Counties Without Borders. And one of the highlights of that was a merged public health entity, which is actually very relevant right now. Not only did it save money, but they have been able to increase their service levels for contact tracing to the point where I was just talking with Josh, their county administrator. They are providing services on par or even better than neighboring Milwaukee County with even more resources. This is a regional partnership, costs Josh's county, Washington County, less money overall, and higher level of service is what they're able to provide. Our hope is, how can we help you imagine down the road, if you have time to think about it, how many more Inglewood fleet opportunities are out there? How many opportunities do you have to possibly pull off a Counties Without Borders? Last point I'll leave you with, there are companies out there who do this stuff. They find regional solutions. There are business models. That tends to be one of the points that trips us up. I picked SafeBuilt because they are an organization we have long partnered with. They provide regional community development and building inspection services, and they've even broadened that now to engineering, all the way to parks and facilities maintenance. And the thing to think about is, if SafeBuilt can do this as a private sector company, provide a regional solution, and actually make a very sustainable, viable business out of it, couldn't we do the exact same thing on our own as local governments within our own region, whether it's community development and planning and engineering and parks and facilities maintenance, or whatever services that you're in? Not every program will make perfect sense for a partnership overall, but at least ask the question. There are plenty of business models out there that exist. Well, I know we're at the end of our time. That is the 3-point plan. I just wanted to hit it in summary. First and foremost, keeping an eye on the ever-evolving indicators of what new policies what are the consequences of new policies that we have to enact, and what will be the consequence on your revenue streams and your expenses. Continual fiscal forecasting and scenario planning is paramount. Point 2, there will come a time when we've exhausted our line item strategies and solutions and everything we can do, and to equip yourself with programmatic data. If you have the time to do it now is the time to be able to use that data when the time comes, if a W or an L begins to emerge. And then finally, looking out not that long term, but if I were in your position, I would at least want to know what the options are for serious partnerships, ways that we can in-source services like Inglewood Fleet, or if you're Sheridan or Cherry Hills Village in that case, where can you outsource services and save money? Finding regional partners and mapping out who's doing what might yet give you more options, whether or not you need to use them. And that is the summary of our 3-point plan. Thanks, everybody. I know everyone stayed a minute after the hour. We can certainly take some questions. I'm going to stick around. If you have to leave, no problem whatsoever. We will save this recording and we will post it to YouTube and follow up with you. Kirsten, I'll follow up with your questions specifically as well. We encourage you to take the survey if you haven't done that. That data we are posting regularly on our own website, I think every week or even every few days. The fiscal health